Insider attacks. High-level talks are underway to figure out the cause of ambushes by Afghan troops. Fisher House, the defense secretary and Army chief of staff help a famous late-night host give big to charity. Korea visit. The secretary of the Army is visiting Camp Humphreys to meet and greet troops. Plus,
the Blue Angel Delta Breakout.
Air show. The Blue Angels and the Golden Knights help entertain crowds in Chicago. Around the Services starts right now.
Now, proudly serving those who serve. This is Around the Services.
Hello and welcome. I'm Staff Sergeant Josh Hauser. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, is in Afghanistan Monday, where he's meeting with U.S. leaders on the ground. And most certainly a major topic of discussion will focus on the growing problem of insider attacks. It's enough of a challenge for coalition forces to defend themselves against insurgents, but increasingly they're also under attack from some members of the Afghan security forces. So far this year, there have been 40 cases where an Afghan security force member has turned his gun on coalition personnel. 23 U.S. service members have been killed. The most recent incident reportedly came Sunday. That makes for 10 attacks in the last 2 weeks alone. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta spoke on this topic last week at the Pentagon, along with General Martin Dempsey.
Make no mistake about it, I've been very concerned about these incidents, both of us have, because of the lives lost and because of the potential damage to our partnership efforts.
Secretary Panetta spoke with Afghan President Hamid Karzai this weekend and discussed the latest rash of attacks. Pentagon spokesman George Little said the two leaders agreed U.S. and Afghan officials need to work even more closely to minimize the potential for future attacks. The secretary also encouraged President Karzai to maintain an ongoing rapport with ISAF Commanding General John Allen to counter the insider threat.
Our forces continue to partner closely in the field, and they have not let these incidents disrupt those operations.
Several options are being looked at in an effort to stop these attacks. However, Secretary Panetta says a lot of the problems are being caused by the Taliban.
The reality is the Taliban has not been able to regain any territory lost. And so they're resorting to these kinds of attacks to create havoc. And there's no question it's of concern, it's dangerous, and we've got to do everything we can do to try to prevent it.
In addition to meeting with U.S. military leaders, General Dempsey during his visit is also meeting with Afghan leaders. While military officials are also trying to understand the causes, external and internal, behind those attacks and what can be done to stop them. NATO TV's Jake Tupman continues our team coverage with that part of the story.
Parade day at Camp Shurabak in Helmand province, and 1,400 new recruits have graduated into the Afghan National Army. But it's not been the graduations grabbing the headlines recently. It's been the rise in attacks where a coalition soldier's been killed by a member of the Afghan security forces or someone posing as a member. Investigations have found many of these cases have been caused by cultural misunderstandings and combat stress. But in some incidents, insurgent infiltration is to blame.
Where there's an insurgency, there is going to be an attempt to infiltrate. And you can't stop it. But what you can try to do is neutralize it. And we're trying to find the best ways to not overcome just the attacks that are occurring, but I think more importantly, those conditions that allow that type of an insider threat to flourish.
So far this year, there have been 31 incidents of insider attacks, leaving 39 dead. That's more than any previous year. But it's not just coalition troops who have been targeted. Afghan security forces have also been turning their guns on each other.
We are taking every step we can, and it's important to note, with our Afghan colleagues to protect not only ISAF, not only the NATO forces, but the Afghan forces. We've just completed a series of discussions with the senior Afghan leadership, and they are aware of their responsibilities as the Army's leadership to put in place the training, the command and control structures, the leadership necessary to neutralize, to mitigate this phenomena, if you will.
With both Afghan and ISAF soldiers targeted in the attacks, ISAF is keen to point out that this is a shared problem and that they are working closely with Afghan officers to try and prevent such incidents.
But there's other issues that right now we're still trying to define. What are some of the external factors that are involved that would force an individual to pick up his arms and attack those that were previously his friends? The poverty, the illiteracy, the unemployment rates, the child mortality, all of those conditions that would lead people to be susceptible to that type of influence.
The many reasons for insider attacks has led the recruitment and vetting process to come under scrutiny, something ISAF say they are working on with the Afghans. But while ISAF acknowledge these attacks have tragic consequences, they also say that with almost 500,000 ISAF and Afghan troops in the country and interaction between the two encouraged, these incidents are not endemic and will not derail the efforts of the coalition forces to develop their Afghan partners.
When I see the Afghans graduate, it's a measure of success. But you know, the true test is our ability to retain them, to develop them as they move forward. I think the one area that we sometimes overlook is the pride that Afghanistan takes now in those graduates. You see now the tribal elders making personal recommendations on which young men in their tribes are now eligible or should be considered to be soldiers. So you are seeing a rejuvenation, a revitalization of the profession of arms here in Afghanistan, and we can't underestimate that.
This is Jake Tutman reporting from Helmand for the NATO channel.
Soldiers at Camp Humphreys in Korea got a recent visit from the Secretary of the Army. John McHugh took time to meet with soldiers and their families during his visit. The Secretary met with members of the 2nd Combat Aviation Brigade and toured new housing and training facilities. Camp Humphreys will be the future headquarters post for U.S. Forces Korea, and the Army will play a critical role in the new strategy in the Asia-Pacific region.
This is a very important part of the world. The peninsula remains one of the most challenging places from a sense of stability. Our partnership with the Republic of Korea and its armed forces is essential to making sure that we can continue to better bring peace and stability to both the peninsula, in fact, throughout the entire region. And the United States Army Forces on Korea are the key element of that program.
Camp Humphreys is home to the 8th Army, the Army's only operational level combat formation on the Asian mainland. Exercise Forest Flight opened in southwest Japan. U.S. service members are teaming up with their Japanese counterparts for a 2-week drill aimed at building relationships. Senior Airman Sarah Bryce has more.
On what was supposed to be a nice day, the weather at Hijudai Maneuver Area turned from sunny to rainy in an instant. But that didn't stop the Japanese and U.S. troops from gathering to celebrate the start of Exercise Forest Light.
I'm confident the Marines and sailors of Combat Assault Battalion are prepared to give 100% throughout the exercise and display the capabilities we have forged throughout the years.
Forest Light is a bilateral exercise that brings U.S. sailors and Marines and the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force together to exchange training maneuvers and ideas.
And increase our skills at the individual and unit level.
One of the first steps towards obtaining these goals is to learn how to work together, which is why the Japanese troops invited U.S. service members to celebrate with them in a night of culture and camaraderie. The weather was still wet, but spirits could not be dampened.
What can make me feel this way?
As sailors and Marines were greeted warmly by the Japanese. And while there might have been a small language barrier, That did not stop the bilateral group from enjoying their first official night together. Actions spoke louder than words, and new bonds were formed with our Pacific allies, marking the beginning of an exercise forged from friendship. Senior Airman Sarah Bryce, Hijidai Maneuver Area, Japan.
The Defense Department is conducting pilot classes for a new program called Transition Goals Plan Success, or simply Transition GPS. Now, it's designed to better prepare service members heading back into civilian life. Military members attended a week-long class that is held at 7 installations. Transition GPS replaces the 20-year-old Transition Assistance Program. A relic of the past is brought back to life to commemorate a victory in the War of 1812. The USS Constitution, you can see the 215-year-old ship underway. It's under its own power for the first time since 1997. The ship cruised across the Boston Harbor for 17 minutes, traveling a distance of 1,100 yards. Doesn't sound far, but pretty far, much further than most 215-year-olds. Constitution was first launched back in 1797. Well, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and Army Chief of Staff General Ray Odierno helped Tonight Show host Jay Leno auction one of his beloved cars to benefit the Fisher House. Leno sold his Fiat 500 Prima Edizione, or how is that, Edizione, for $600,000, donating all proceeds to the organization. Fisher House Foundation is a nonprofit that provides support services for veterans, including housing and wounded warriors and their families while they recover. And coming up ahead on Around the Services, the Air Force takes a bite out of the Big Apple. But first, change at the top, scenes from a transfer ceremony at Camp Arifjan in Kuwait.